Hello and welcome to another ATARC webinar. Today, topic experts will share strategies that agencies can implement to alleviate the concern of the unknown and make operations more efficient. My name is Kirsten Patton, and I'll be moderating today's panel discussion. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and we are a nonprofit that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to accelerate technology modernization initiatives. We provide ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. I want to welcome all of our attendees for joining us online from home today, and a special thanks to Victoria Nowinski and the entire Flexera team for helping us make today's event possible. This afternoon, we are going to hear from our panelists, followed by a Q&A session. We'll also pop in a few poll questions, and if you have questions of your own, we'd be happy to answer some of yours. But before we begin, I just want to encourage the audience to please submit those questions of your own in the Q&A section of this platform. And also, when the poll questions come up, be sure that you answer them in order to receive your CPE credits. So with all of that said, I'd like to welcome our panelists to come on camera. Looks like everybody who has a camera will be joining us is already on. But I'm going to start by asking Hengi, if you could please introduce yourself to our audience. Tell us a little bit about yourself to kick things off.
Hi everyone, my name is Hengi. I'm currently the CDO at CPSC. My entire career has pretty much been in analytics and in the systems that support it. I'm a subject matter expert in machine learning, advanced analytics, and very recently AI, because AI is different now than it was a year ago. Besides doing analysis for the government, I'm a scientist, and my active area of research is in causal models and Bayesian networks. So essentially, it's one level below a neural network, which is what drives our general purpose AIs. And that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you. Really happy to have you here today. And I'll ask Ida if you could please intro yourself next.
My name is Ida Mix, and I am the Chief Information Security Officer at the Bureau of Industry and Security, and I'm also over network administration. And I have been at the Bureau for about 12 years, and all with the cybersecurity program. So it has been quite a journey, as you can imagine. I started my career as telecommunications programmer. So this is like I guess the other end of the tunnel. I'm looking at it.
Great, thank you so much. Let's jump to Sherry next.
Yes, this is Sherry Thomas. I am the Cyber Technology Officer at Marine Corps Forces Cyberspace Command, see in the back. In addition, we have other hats. Another one is Marine Corps Forces Space Command, in terms of the network stuff that's coming across. And then from the cyber stuff, it's defensive cyber posture, and from an offensive side too. So looking at multiple different angles, and we are the service component, cyber component to U.S. Cyber Command, and also to the Fleet Marine Forces. So it's the entire landscape, and it ties into the discussion today in terms of zero trust and getting all the information in the totality for IT asset visibility. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. Let's jump to Bo next, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Bo Burles. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer at GSA. I'm responsible for all things cyber, both inwards as well as outwards. We are focused around ensuring cyber resiliency for all of our information systems and data within the agency, as well as outwards in terms of broad-based support for a lot of our government-wide shared services, things like cloud.gov, login.gov, sam.gov. In addition to that, we are effectively the landlord of the government with roughly 9,000 buildings within the agency portfolio that we own, as well as lease through commercial service providers, to the rest of the federal government. So building security comes into that as well. And as with building security, zero trust is an element that goes into that, particularly as it relates to support for OT, IoT within building spaces, including building support networks. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Bo. All right, David, over to you.
Hi, my name's Dave Mihelsick, and I'm a consultant now, but for 32 years, I was with the Department of Navy and Department of Defense. I retired as the Chief Technology Officer from the Defense Information Systems Agency. But going back to the beginning, in the 80s, I worked what we called ComSec and CompuSec for the Navy, and we were some of the first, let's call them cybersecurity folks in the Department of Defense. In fact, I had the distinction of starting the Navy's firewall program in the mid-90s. And at the time, we believed that firewalls were going to be a short-term mechanisms to shore up our networks until we could do what we now know as zero trust. But unfortunately, we got distracted by other things, and most of the Department of Defense relied primarily on boundary defenses for then the next 25 plus years. So we're finally going to circle back and correct some of those mistakes of yesteryear and move to a zero trust environment.
Excellent. Well, really happy to have you here. And again, for those just joining us, please feel free to submit questions that you may have for our panelists in the Q&A chat. And this can be as interactive as you like. So with that being said, Sherry, I'd really like to kind of start with you on the first question, and then we'll go around and hear from all of our panelists. But the first question I want to dive into is around what the significance of having an accurate, trusted, and complete picture of an agency's IT estate in order to advance zero trust mandates. What's really the significance there? Did I pause? Or
First of all, can you hear?
oh, I thought it was me for a second. Can you hear me okay?
We're good.
Yes, it's coming in well. Thank you.
Okay. Cool. So over
Okay.
to
The first question.
we might be having a little bit of bandwidth issues. Is it just me, or can you guys hear Sherry? You can't hear him?
You're good.
All right,
I
cool.
can hear him fine.
You can hear him?
Yes.
Oh, it must just be me then.
Okay, then I will continue. Sorry.
Please.
Sorry, folks.
Well, never mind.
Maybe go off video.
All right, let's jump over to Bo. Maybe do you want to start with this question, and then we can circle back to Sherry once he's got.
Sure, Kirsten. Visibility is really fundamental and central to anything cyber. You cannot effectively protect and defend against what you do not know. Cannot effectively protect, defend against what you cannot see. So, broadly speaking, having an accurate, trusted, and complete picture of what's essentially running within your network, both in terms of hardware and software, is really fundamental. Without that full picture, the ability to really be able to achieve anything close to zero trust is next to impossible. More broader than visibility to devices and software, also goes to the effect of you having an understanding of your data. Making sure that we are fully aware of what our information is, where it's at, particularly that which we believe is the most sensitive information relative to our networks. And then more broadly than that, effectively expanding it further to our user base, understanding all the types of users and user constituencies that we have, both in terms of users within the federal enterprise, public users, government-wide users, partner organizations that facilitate access into our information systems. Because fundamentally speaking, without visibility, there is no ability to effectively define accountability. Without accountability, there's no ability to facilitate related response and recovery operations, particularly whenever there's an incident.
Yeah, thank you for kicking us off there. Hingy, is there anything that you want to add to this question?
Yeah, so, I can speak quite a bit to the user perspective of what happens when you implement a ZTA. We have four CISOs on here, and so I'll leave all the technology questions to you guys. But I'm fairly new at my current agency, but when we came in, when I came in, there was a security breach that happened 3 years ago, right? So essentially, we have PII and 6B, which is just PII for companies. But we had one of our statisticians send a report out to Consumer Reports that had all the PII and 6B attached to it, right? And it kind of kicked off this huge issue, and the IG got involved. And so, that kind of sped us along to implementing zero trust architecture. And it also made me realize too, that the systems that we had prior to this and the training that we had prior to this really was all in line with what the government standards are. The only thing we did not account for was what happened, right? When you have single points of failure like this. And so this person didn't do it maliciously. Essentially, he forgot to uncheck a box right before the report went out. So now we have all of these built-in processes to make sure that never happens again, including multiple layers of checks before information goes out again, as well as the implementation of additional system security that I personally don't think has anything to do with what happened, but that was one of the requirements of the IG. So I think in terms of zero trust, in terms of the significance of this, I'm very much on the insider portion of ZTA. I think it's one thing to talk about ZTA and implementing it, and it's another to make sure that everybody understands what that means. And also just making it really apparent that you have to check and uncheck boxes before you send a report.
Thank you. Ida, how about you? Would you like to speak to this one?
Sure. I would say having a accurate picture of your asset inventory sort of kind of preceded ZTA a little. This is part of the CDM initiatives that we have been kicking off and making sure that we had an accurate picture of our network. And so I took a look at this issue from a different perspective, more from a personal perspective. Like you said, there are CISOs on the call. And so from a personal standpoint, one of the some of the initiatives I found from being knowing what's on your network is trustworthiness and reliability. So if you're in a meeting and you can speak confident to things that comes up because you know what's on your network and you know what's not on your network. And it's also important that you have an accurate inventory from a perspective. If you don't want to be able to push the panic button too often every time something comes up, just because you have a version of, let's say, a software on your system, you may not have that revision or you may not have that level. So now you're not panicking, you know what revision has the problem. You can go back and say, okay, we have this software, but we are not at that rev level that has the problem. And so you can avoid needless panic throughout your organization. And like I said, once you're in these meetings, people know that they can rely on you, that you know what's on your network, and have some confidence in that the CISO knows exactly what they're talking about.
Oh, certainly, thank you. And Sherry, do we have you back?
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Or maybe I jinxed it.
Yes.
All right, David, and then we'll go back to Sherry.
So, I'm going to second what all of my other panelists have already said. You can't defend what you don't know is there. And most critical in this is not just that we have this inventory, but this inventory is gathered and correlated in an automated fashion, because no human or no army of humans is capable of keeping track of the users, devices, and detailed software assets on those devices by hand. And still, many organizations are attempting to do this by hand with spreadsheets and databases, and it does not work. It guarantees failure. So not only do we need these inventories, but they must be gathered and reconciled and then presented for usability in an automated fashion.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Is there anything else anyone wants to share before I call for the first poll question?
Yeah, Kirsten, let me add something to that. I mean, broadly speaking, just, looking back over the last 2 years, we've had, fundamental challenges with things like SolarWinds. We've had fundamental challenges with, vulnerabilities in the Log4j module. And we've had particular requirements through Congress around prohibited devices incorporated into the National Defense Authorization Act that preclude federal agencies, departments, and government from being able to use technologies from Huawei, ZTE, Hikvision, Dahua, et cetera. And without technology that is able to go through and automatically detect and be able to alert and facilitate some kind of a coordinated response, you cannot effectively run an effective cybersecurity program. And, within agency networks, we're all supposed to be integrated with the federal CDM program. And part of that program is this notion of knowing what's in your network. And we have network access control solutions that are informed whenever there are devices that are of a certain class or manufacturer that could be, configured in a way to automatically feed into a SOC to alert when there is a Huawei device that is tied to a GSA network or another federal agency network, to be able to facilitate that response action. And when you look at it as it relates to, software and software components like Log4j, having that fundamental understanding of where you have Log4j running across your ecosystem is fundamental. Without that, you can potentially be widely and broadly exposed via a multitude of attack vectors that you cannot readily respond to. So these things go down to the ABCs of cybersecurity and making sure that they're fundamentally in place, because without these, the core understanding of what's included, within your network in terms of high-level software packages, hardware, and over time, more specific software components, hence the need for software bill of materials, understanding the modules that are integrated as part of larger software packages. I cannot stress enough how important this is in terms of being able to not only achieve zero trust, but just do practical cybersecurity management.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for adding to that.
Yeah, this is Sherry Thomas, if I may add.
Yes, please.
Okay, from a DoD perspective, there are 7 pillars for zero trust. And one of the critical components is the visibility and analytics. To be able to do that properly, you need to be able to react to the security information and event management when it happens, as was kind of highlighted on earlier. It's the user to the device and the device to the application. And once you get into the application, what can be done, what can be tracked, and how can it be logged? We talked about a couple of things like the SolarWinds and Log4j, right? The system needs to be able to react to it and provide the hooks and security in place so that those managed devices and the unmanaged devices are protected in terms of the larger, from our space, it's the DoD information network. But multiple different networks that are available, right? And you got to think about, like in the older days, before we talked about perimeter security and the boundaries, there was a castle and there was a moat and there was guards, and the guards were protecting the castle. But there, you cannot say in today's realm, if every single person that's entering should be entering, and then the level of access they need to get to. It may change once they get in. You might not need this much or that much, or something is only time limited. So the system needs to be able to adapt to that. Over.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing, Sherry. Anything else from our panelists before I call for poll question number 1? Or we can go ahead and just get that up on the screen now. All right, so poll question number 1 for folks at home. What steps are you currently taking to accurately capture your detailed IT and software asset environment in preparation for a zero trust transition? So please take a moment to respond to that. And then Ida, I'd love to start with you on this next question. I want to ask, why is developing a real-time situational awareness and understanding of everything on your network crucial for federal agencies?
Thanks, Kirsten. That's crucial for federal agencies because now you can have an accurate picture into your security posture. And from an incident response standpoint, you can improve your mean time to respond by knowing what's on your network and what to mitigate. Also, that would help you define whether or not you need to activate your contingency plans. And you can also develop containment strategies and also mitigation plans. Sometimes you may not be able to effectively, let's say, mitigate right away, but you know what's on your network and where you can set up containment strategies. So whatever the vulnerability is, that it doesn't spread to your wider network.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have anything to add on that question?
Yeah, Dave Mihalsik here. Good answer, and I just like to add the bad guy always gets a vote, and we can come up with the most clever architectures and the best plans, but the bad guy, our adversaries, are going to find a way around those. So only through real-time visibility and situational awareness can we act, can we detect what's going on, and can we maneuver our cyber defenses and react and recover from those attacks on our infrastructures.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, this is Sherry Thomas. So something else to add would be privileged access management and segregation down to the lowest level, as I kind of hit on previously too. Each person or each group only needs to get to the information that they need to get to at a certain point in a certain time and space. So there needs to be nothing beyond that. And it's always user verification and authentication in terms of checking back in and saying, am I valid? And do I still need access to the same set of information, or more or less accordingly? It should be based on those privileged accesses that this is done, and then tracking user and entity behavior analytics in terms of, is somebody logging in at 3 a.m. in the morning, and what are they doing at that time, right? There might be some special mission, but more than likely it's not. So we just need to verify everything. Over.
Yeah, thank you. Bo, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just to kind of stitch, I think what, my fellow panel members are saying is that, we strive to effectively achieve central visibility across everything that effectively runs across our network. And that means that, if it's got an ability to effectively produce a log element, we centrally collect that log data and then further enrich that log data with threat information, with tooling data, treating data as a fundamental asset. Understanding that without that fundamental understanding, we're precluded from being able to go through and facilitate response. And therein, it's really focused around identifying key usages, key usage patterns, and then integrating that wherever possible with visualization, dashboard orchestration capabilities to really be able to go through and scale the size and scope of our human capital. As David mentioned earlier, this is a software and automation challenge. We cannot effectively hire enough people to be able to go through and do the work of network defenders on an everyday basis. And I think one of the other technology elements corresponding to this, especially correlated to zero trust, is this notion of microsegmentation, fundamentally believing and adhering to a network that is untrusted. And within GSA, we are implementing microsegmentation technology within our data center for application-to-application microsegmentation for our users and devices via implementation of SASE technologies, ensuring that two devices sitting right next to each other, connected to the same exact switch, are never aware of one another. They cannot see one another. In a traditional network design, I can see them and I can probably hop over to it and be able to go through and use lateral attack techniques to be able to go through and facilitate a compromise. And within our cloud spaces, we're focused on ensuring that continued microsegmentation as well, particularly within container spaces and within building networks as a custodian of the federal buildings within the federal portfolio. We've been increasingly working towards implementing microsegmentation for OT/IoT, moving beyond traditional IP-based network routing to what we call intent-based routing, where devices are coalesced around device groupings, such that the only thing that they can do, regardless of where they're located across the enterprise, is they can only talk to another device profile group that they're allowed to communicate to. And I think these technologies and these concepts are really central to taking the visibility you have and then facilitating a means of technical control and then aligning it to response and recovery operations whenever there are challenges or anomalies that really need to be reacted to.
Yeah, thanks, Bo. Does anyone have anything else they'd like to add there?
I'd like to add points, Kristen. Also, as I mentioned earlier, this ability to see the hardware and software started as part of a CDM initiative from CISA. And one of the things that they are charged with is looking at and protecting the federal systems. So from their perspective, it gives them to oversight, and they can determine whether anomalies are happening at a particular agency, separate agency, or department, or maybe this is something government-wide. And so when they release their cyber intelligence, we'll have a better feel for what to look for.
Thank you, Ida. I'm going to go ahead and call for poll question number 2 then. So we'll have that up on the screen here. But poll question number 2 asks, how are you validating the accuracy of your IT inventory asset data in terms of cyber risk, license change implications, performance output cost ratio prior to migration or modernization initiatives? So please take a moment there. Hengi, I'd love to start with you on the next question that we have related to challenges. So what are some of the challenges associated with achieving a high degree of IT visibility for agencies, but especially in the post-COVID era? Could you please speak to your experience there?
First, I want to say it's important to get that on your strategic plan. Make sure it's properly championed. We're in the very early stages of assessing how our analytical tools are being used, how often they're being used. So it goes to what Sherry said about making sure that folks have only have access to the information they need. But we're able to, at least from an analytical standpoint, figure out what the abnormal use patterns are. So, and when I say abnormal, I don't mean necessarily just somebody trying to do something malicious at 3 o'clock in the morning. But really, somebody who has a $30,000 license, they may only use it 12 times throughout the year, right? And they're either underutilizing that license or they're using it for a very specific purpose. And to be able to document that, to kind of ask questions of whether or not we need those licenses, we need the IT infrastructure behind them. And if we do, if we're transitioning to a new system, and right now we are transferring to a cloud-based solution for some of our major databases, especially with electronic health records, I think it's really, really important that we know who has access to what. And a lot of this also just feeds into the example I gave earlier, which is right now, the IG and all of the commissioners, they're very interested, right, in why we have a blanket. We have this blanket policy, which is everybody gets access to everything, as long as they're a CPSC employee and they, go through their security check. And that's a really good question. And I think it starts with doing an audit of who's using what. It helps us also with our not just our strategic decision making, but also with our incident response in case something does happen. So, previously, right, when somebody sends out something that has sensitive information on it, we can dig a little bit deeper and say, okay, well, is this a one-off? Is this a one-off incident, right? Or is there some kind of pattern of behavior behind that that is being performed by all of our statisticians and mathematicians across the board? And I think it's also important to really understand, right, that these folks are data scientists, they're statisticians, they're not thinking about zero trust. They're not thinking about, what it means when certain information gets released out into the wild. And I think this is going to be increasingly interesting once we start leveraging some of these AI solutions that's available to us, because you can send out 2 pieces of public information, right? And then have that become sensitive when these advanced analytics are applied to it. But yeah.
Certainly. Thank you so much for kicking us off there. Bo, did you have anything you want to add to that question?
I think, you talk about challenges with achieving visibility. I think, what the last few years have effectively demonstrated is that the very which way in which we do work has fundamentally changed. I'm at home, I'm going into the office a day a week, but, mostly at home. So we are an incredibly distributed organization. And I think that is commonplace across both industry as well as government. We're using a combination of different types of devices, including in some cases, increasing usage of personal devices. We're using more and more SaaS-based solutions that are moving away from traditional software systems that are running within our networks. We're relying on mobile devices and applications increasingly. All that essentially means is that fundamentally, the nature of work and how we do that work, where we do that work, from what device we do that work is being changed. So from an IT standpoint, from a cyber standpoint, it's essentially challenging teams to have to reimagine what we do and how we do it, particularly relative to protection mechanisms that have to be brought to bear to be able to protect users, to be able to protect devices, to be able to protect our data sets. And, some of the corresponding challenges is the need to reimagine, traditional IT service delivery, traditional cybersecurity service delivery, to really address these broad challenges that have effectively been realized through pandemic. And this is where I think zero trust comes in, is that, some of these fundamental pillars around, reimagining, the very various set of pillars corresponding in terms of users, networks, devices, applications, data, I think, puts the onus on us to have to go through and align with the security of our systems and data, given all of these changes that are actually happening around. And for me, I'm optimistic because they present an opportunity. If you believe that how we've done cyber, how we've done IT is good over the last 10, 20 years, you probably don't need to change. But if you fundamentally believe that it's broken and no longer commensurate with the level of threats and risk that we face individually within our organizations and as a government, zero trust is a clear opportunity to really be able to go through and go to a greenfield type mentality and really reimagine a lot of the traditional notions that we've approached, IT and cyber with.
Thank you, Bo. We'll go with David and then Sherry. So David, go ahead.
So just to follow on to both of the last great comments, the cloud is got a net acceleration coming out of COVID. Federal agencies saw how the cloud could help them quickly and in a cost-effective manner throw up services that help their employees during the extended work at home period. And that's not going to change. But what it means is we're going to have software, we're going to have infrastructure that runs in the cloud. It may be as a service, like say Office 365, or it may be ephemeral, where it's just a software license that we turn up in an infrastructure as a service cloud when we need it, or even government written software that just comes online only when needed and then disappears. So whatever capabilities we have to do this visibility and inventory across our software and device environment needs to be able to take into account the cloud. We cannot ignore that because that will leave a huge blind spot in our cybersecurity situational awareness.
Thank you, David. And Sherry, please go ahead.
Yes. So from our perspective, from zero trust at a high visibility would be the unmanaged devices, because you got to make sure things are patched. There's device compliance, and devices are supposed to be on the network when they're in the good cybersecurity hygiene state, if you will. We call that cyber ready. And we're doing that through currency in terms of, do I have trust in my systems? If not, I'm going to take it offline. And until it gets remediated, you're not allowed to come back in. It's basically like an individual gets trust and gets a credit score, for example, in a banking industry. Similar to that, you have a cyber score, and it allows you to get on the network. It's not simply saying I did the basics. It's basically how are you behaving and how are you with the device, trying to get on to the access to certain sets of information, and are you performing any anomalies? So that's the type of approach we're taking. Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. Any other comments from our panelists before I call for the next poll, and then we're going to answer some audience questions? Okay, then let's go ahead and put up our third and final poll question. So folks at home, here's the last one. What is your state of maturity with respect to a zero trust transition? Please take a moment to respond to that. And then panelists, over in the Q&A, there are quite a few questions that have come in. Let's see, I see one from Fabian Delgado asking, what are your agencies leveraging metadata tagging policies and frameworks to help with asset data and IT systems, software, governance, security, lifecycle management, and strategies like zero trust? So any thoughts on that from Fabian? Sherry, I see your hand is up, but I don't know if it's still up from the previous question or if you want to respond. By all means, still respond.
That was an error, but anyway, I will respond. From metadata tagging perspective, this is critical because we have to be able to do authentication, user authentication. And to do that in the future, we're going to be doing it through attribute-based access control and role-based access control. So those are the primary mechanisms in terms of user authentication. And the user, like I said before, user has to be able to get to the device. And these means of authentication, we're going to try to do it through single sign-on. And there's various other mechanisms in terms of getting the user to the prospective area that they need to get to. Beyond that, you're cut off. There's going to be either a wall or there's going to be a second access point built in place. But metadata data tagging is critical to that. And it's not the user that's supposed to be doing. The system, through generative AI and through the different machine learning techniques, should be able to figure out what type of data and those second order implications of that data. Over.
Thank you. Let's go David and then Bo. David, go ahead.
So, yeah, Sherry, talking about metadata and attribute-based access control and policy-based access control. Those are critical concepts. And in fact, this may be the hardest part about zero trust, right? It's not just about technology. It's not just about inventory. It's going to be about understanding what our data is, what our policies for access to that data are, and what we know about our people so we can make those access control decisions. And we should not underestimate the magnitude of this task. So it's probably going to be a journey rather than an event. In the DoD, we had an initiative in the early 2000s called the net-centric enterprise services that defined an architecture that looks eerily like the zero trust architecture that we outlined by NIST in the DoD. And we got a little way down the road in terms of creating security mechanisms to enforce that. But then unfortunately, as we're sometimes wont to do, we got distracted by other priorities and let that really go fallow. So I think the time is right. You got to understand your data. You got to understand your policies for accessing that data, and you got to understand your users if you're going to be able to make those kind of decisions.
Thank you, David. Go ahead, Bo.
Yeah, just everything that everybody else said, and but I can give some anecdotal examples. I've been mentioning microsegmentation. Two of the projects that we have in play right now, one corresponds to microsegmentation within our buildings for OT/IoT. And then the other, we recently wrapped up deployment of a secure access, secure edge solution where we've completely removed our traditional VPN architecture, where our network is the internet. Users anywhere around the globe can effectively be tied into GSA's infrastructure regardless of location. So the traditional paradigms of I have to effectively authenticate and access via VPN into a traditional perimeter-centric network design has essentially gone away. And we've been able to do that, through a fundamental, analysis and tracking of our data. The first 8 months of our SASE deployment, we just basically observed. We looked at what users were doing, what they were accessing, and then started to go through and build data models corresponding to those applications, defining birthright policies for a contractor, birthright policies for a federal employee, birthright policies based on specific job and role functions within the organization, such that if you're a building manager and you have to access a building system, that building system shouldn't be available to star.star. It should only be available to those set of building managers within the ecosystem. So normalizing all of that data against a common data reference model, enumerating what your roles profiles look like, and establishing policies, it helps to make the job of actual enforcement so much easier. When we transitioned fully to lockdown mode for our SASE deployment, we had a total of 11 tickets when we actually deployed the implementation in lockdown policy. And the reason being is that listening and monitoring and then building around what you've learned fundamentally makes that job of enforcement so much easier. And I think we've had similar experiences across our microsegmentation employment, particularly around our building space as well.
Thank you, Bo. And as a follow-on question, Fabian asks, are your metadata tagging policies coordinated with offices outside of CIO or IT, like with your chief data officer, privacy officer, and risk management?
I wish it were. I think I typically get the tail end of it. So the move to ZTA was already made. So, and it's kind of interesting, right? So, we have these separate roles, and I feel like we all have our distinct roles in kind of making sure that this works. And yet, we're kind of on the receiving end of the new ZTA policy. So I guess a better question, right? And we have so many CISOs online here, is typically how does that work? Do you just apply the template, whether that be the NIST template or you're doing the Google or Microsoft ZTA? You just do the implementation, and then all of the things that need to be done afterwards, you just kind of propagate that through the rest of the leadership.
So
Go ahead, Ida.
I was going to say, in my agency, one of the things I did was draft data governance policy. And what I've been hoping is that the business would take the lead on that. At my level, I'm looking at data as an asset. It's like you can say, we can put the technology there. We can extract the PII information. We can extract certain information out of, programmatically. But the business people are the ones who deal with the data more intimately. They're the ones that know if they're working on a project, they want that project protected. They want to tag that project to know that that project, any information should not leave the organization about the data. So that's been my approach to this, is to try and get the business people, force them to say, okay, you understand your data better than I do. I'm looking at it from a 1,000 feet spectrum. You should own your data and you should properly tag your data. Then I can add the security on top of it, but it should not be just because it was not PII, the data was okay to flow out. The business people have to own the data.
Thank you, Ida. And go ahead.
I'm sorry, did you say about?
Did you have your hand raised?
I can chime in.
Put it down.
I think that's from before, but I can chime in. I mean, fundamentally speaking, the answer is we should all be working together in a perfect universe. CISO IT organizations are working with CDOs that are developing common reference models, common schemas, common connection models, such that everybody is effectively interoperable with everybody else. Realistically speaking, while that is a goal and we strive to go through and work towards that goal, a lot of times it's not always possible, largely based on where certain organizations are relative to their maturity, relative to other parts of the organization. And to the extent that we've tried to go through and ensure that our reference model is effectively visible and shared with our peers within GSA, we try to go through and do that everywhere. But realistically speaking, the CDO function, as Hengi might probably agree with me, is relatively newer, particularly relative to the cyber function. And, part of that essentially involves a crawl, walk, run type mentality where we have to go through and express a lot of the needs that we have across the, CDO function, the IT function, the security function, such that we're all effectively bringing that data together, across a common data lake or multiple lakes that facilitates the intersharing and usage of that data that makes it a lot more readily possible. But for ourselves, to the extent that we have, yes, we've tried to go through and integrate as closely as possible with our CDO function, but there is a lot more that can absolutely happen. And this is one area that we continue to effectively strive to move forward, particularly in terms of inputs around how data that security has can be more broadly integrated with data across other functions. And where necessary, yes, the need to change and apply different tagging structures and naming schemas just to facilitate that interrelationship.
Yeah, thank you. Sherry, go ahead.
Yes, so from our perspective at the DoD, we have to look at the business, warfighting, and intel mission areas and bring them all together. And from the higher level down to the tactical user, right, we have to look at it from a vision, a strategic intent, and an implementation plan, how to get it done at the DDIL environment, we'd call it, because it's always going to be low latency, bandwidth limited, disrupted. And then from data fabric perspective, we're going to remove the silos and it's going to be a fabric between all data streams. So there's going to be owners and there's going to be consumers. There's going to be producers of data and how are they using that? And then we have a new buzzword, or a phrase, data is the new ammunition. So it's not the physical bullets that are going across. It's basically the data and the information that's present that's going to provide us more value in terms of where, when, why, and how. Over.
Thank you. David, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I like everything I've heard, in particular, Ida talking about how we got to move this problem to the business process owners away from the IT guys, and the data or information as ammunition. That is spot on. We used to think as information as a force multiplier. Now it is in fact a force unto itself.
Awesome, thank you. Real quick, we'll fit in one more audience question. This one's for Bo. Dustin Gaston asks, what tools did you use in order to accommodate the approach that you were talking about, the part concerning transitioning away from VPNs?
We use a secure access, secure edge solution. There are multiple vendors within the space. I don't like to disclose exactly what technology that we use. But there are a number of providers within the space that are increasingly part of the solutioning to be able to go through and achieve the pivot that is inherently identified within M2209. M2209 is the OMB's Zero Trust Strategy document, where they are espousing a fundamental pivot from a traditional movement away from a traditional network architecture, where you have your castle and moat analogy that was mentioned earlier, towards really with a focus on protecting users, devices, data directly at the edge. And part of that solution set is SASE, Secure Access, Secure Edge. If you Google it, you'll effectively find a number of providers that are out there, the Palo Altos, the Zscalers of the world, notably that are facilitating some of that change.
Awesome, thank you so much. And then coming up against time now, I just want to give each of you guys a couple minutes to share sort of your final wrap-up thoughts or a key takeaway from this discussion. So anything that you'd like to share with our audience before we end? And I see David's hand raised. So David, we'll start with you.
Zero trust isn't a particular technology, and it's not a particular action. It's about a mindset. It's about establishing an architecture and continuously building towards that architecture.
Thanks, Dave. Really appreciate it. Sherry, go ahead.
Yes, zero trust is not optional. It's essential. It's not hypothetical. It is real. And from the earlier point, it is an ongoing evolution in terms of a journey, right? We have to all subscribe to it. It can't be a one and done deal with anything from the devices to the network, to the user, to the application, data. And to make all that happen, we have to have the appropriate visibility analytics and the automation orchestration. Over.
Thank you. All right, Ida, let's hear from you next.
I was going to say, I see some of the questions they're asking about whether is there a particular technology, a particular solution? And I would say no. I don't think anybody here is ready to declare that they have actually achieved the zero trust and we're done. One of the things I found getting started was a challenge, and basically sometimes you have to look to see, what are the goals of zero trust strategy and what have you accomplished within your organizations. A lot of time you already have certain parts of the zero trust implemented. It may not be, with the technologies that you're that are being espoused now, and that's where you make your budget decisions. One of the things that we had already done was, again, we did not have our network built within the traditional castle moat standpoint. We used mostly a compartmentalized architecture where we had no component on the network talking directly to another component. You always went through a switch or a router. I think Bo had mentioned that earlier. So whenever you would get on our network, you could not just do lateral movements and traverse. And we've gone through several audits, and that architecture is still holding. So when we look at that is, okay, we've got this much done. We just need to build more components onto it, and then we can change the technology. But our basic architecture that we had there for the network is going to hold. And now we just figure out how we're going to build on more and more parts to the architecture. As I mentioned earlier, we had started with the CDM strategy of doing the assets and knowing what is on your network, knowing who is on your network from CISA. So we had started implementing that. And so it's just now a matter of trying to take what we have been doing and incorporate it into the ZTA strategy. So you're not necessarily starting from scratch.
Thank you, Ida. Let's go to Hengi next.
Been a really interesting panel. I think for me, I still struggle with the idea, right, that any user, any device, any network, anything that has a connection is essentially untrusted, right? That's the state you start from. And, the whole principle of, don't trust anything, but you got to verify everything, has a significant user burden associated with it. And, I don't mean just, me getting an SOP saying, hey, you can't use your phone to access certain dashboards, right? Which, happens, but it's really this idea that, we have to address things like microsegmentation, right? And where does the data go? And there's one thing that scientists hate, right? And I particularly don't like it, which is limiting access. So you have a big database, you're saying I can only access 4 tables, here's when I can do it, here's how I can do it. And the whole rationale behind that is that you don't trust me, right? And and that's kind of the basis for ZTA. So I think it's good to hear that the general sentiment here is that we should all work together to come up with the implementation. I wish that were the case, but when I came on board, this was already in the works, and nobody really asked what any of the scientists or subject matter experts thought about limiting their access, other than okay, well, this is not an option. This is the direction that the government is going. We got an OMB memo, and what have you. So I think it's important, right, that something like this exists. What I do need to get to work on is just figuring out how to do the continuous analysis, the continuing monitoring. We have so much data, historical data, on how people use networks and how people use our data and when they access it and how often they access it. But the question comes down to, well, okay, at what point do we raise a flag and all of this? Besides creating a bunch of administrative burden, right? Is that, I understand the security aspect needs to be in place, but there needs to be a conversation as to how we juxtapose the need for zero trust with how much access people really need and really how much administrative burden that means for the users.
Thank you, Hengi. And Bo.
I will say zero trust does not have to be hard. It doesn't have to be a burden. It can effectively be something that improves security, that improves user experience, that modernizes technology. And we're seeing some of that. And we're saving money at the same time, right? Particularly relative to some of the technology that is no longer necessary. So, it's also a modernization play. And, one thing I should note is that as part of our transition, we're not looking at this as a singular solution. We're modernizing our enterprise SSO in terms of single sign-on, modernizing how we effectively connect users to devices in terms of directory structures, modernizing how we connect our users to those devices via secure access, secure edge solutions, modernizing what we collect and how we collect it to facilitate rapid response within correlation of data to threats with via our SOC, leveraging custom dashboarding, machine learning models, and automation to be able to scale our human capital. All that is to say is that, as everybody else said, is that there is no one size fits all solution. A lot of these technologies may already be resonant, but the key point is to fundamentally align to a fundamental basis or a principle document. And I would point your audience members to CISA's Zero Trust Maturity Model. There is a version 2.0 of that maturity model now available. that aligns the varying zero trust pillars of users, devices, networks, applications, and data to specific set capabilities that should be resonant within each of those pillars. And if you try to go through and bite the entire apple at the same time, it's impossible, right? And fundamentally, start with one and build over time. And within our organization, we basically looked at it in terms of asking the simple question, what is foundational? And for us, foundational were the pillars corresponding to users, devices, and networks. So all of our efforts have been around building and reimagining, and that word is really important, reimagining what it takes to be able to modernize, transform, and align to that zero trust mentality. And as we further go into the next FY to 2 FYs, it's really around what the principal discipline is around applications and data. And so this is a multi-year strategy. It will take time, but have a basis or frame of reference. And that CISA reference model, particularly the 2.0 version that is available out in draft, is really a foundational document that everybody should effectively be very familiar with if you are moving down this zero trust approach to network and security protection.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you all so much. We're ending right on time. So before we go, I just want to thank our partners again at Flexera and the folks at home for joining us. Be sure to respond if you'd like to receive your CPE credit for this event. And we hope to see you at the next one, which is May 23rd, all about the AI Bill of Rights framework, algorithmic discrimination. So we hope to see you there. Everyone have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.